Okay, so today we're talking about adjectivals. So we're talking about things being used as adjectives. Adjectivals is kind of a strange word, but that's what we're talking about today. So let's jump right in. First of all, let's talk about participles being used as adjectives. So again, a participle, you're going to look at it and think that's a verb, except when you look at it more closely, you're going to realize it's actually being used as an adjective. So, examples. Our snoring visitor. Snoring would otherwise be a verb, but it is operating as an adjective this time. So this is your participle. Snoring, adjectival participle. The barking dog. Again, barking is normally used in a sentence as a verb, but here it is being used as a participle that is an adjective describing dog. So snoring describes visitor, barking describes dog. So these are the kinds of things we're dealing with in this unit. Alright, let's jump right in. There are a couple of different things to consider for adjectivals. And one is the adjectival prepositional phrase. Actually, I changed my mind. We're going to move to relative. Relative and adjectival clauses. I can cover the prepositional phrase later. Alright, so the adjectival clause, relative clause, here's a good example for you to consider here. The arrow that has left the bow never returns. Alright, so there's a relative clause here. There's an adjectival clause right in the middle of the main clause this time. This is a good example because it is an example of one occurring in the middle of a sentence. So the main clause of the sentence is, the arrow never returns. So arrow is the subject, and returns is the verb. There's your main clause. You have an adverb here, never, that goes with it. But right in the middle of that is a relative clause. Which arrow? Which arrow never returns? The one that has left the bow. So there's your relative clause that is an adjectival. Alright, so you can say that you have a second sentence in the middle of the first one to a certain extent. That's one way to think about it, because that is operating as the subject of this dependent clause, and has left is operating as the verb. This modifies arrow. Which arrow never returns? The one that has left the bow. So, that has left the bow is this clause. Alright, now you have to diagram this thing. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to need the whole board to do it, because the answer is it takes two tiers. This is going to be a two-tier diagram. So, keep your eye on the ball for a moment. The main clause is, the arrow never returns. So you need to diagram your main clause first. Alright, arrow returns. Now you need your determiner, the, and your adverb, never. Now you have diagrammed your main clause. Having accomplished this, you need to move on to the dependent clause. The dependent clause is, that has left the bow. That operates as the subject of this one. Has left, your verb, but there is a direct object here, and the direct object is bow. So, you need to get the word bow up onto your diagram. And the leftover word is the, which is the determiner under bow. The arrow that has left the bow never returns. You need to connect these two tiers together now. This modifies arrow, so you have to make a dotted line between the word that and the word arrow to indicate where the connection between the two tiers is. So whatever the second tier happens to be, whether it's adjectival or an adverbial, whatever it is, it will have to be connected to the word it modifies. So arrow in this case. Alright. let's talk about adverbial information that is actually being used as an adjective. All right, so we've got a kind of a long sentence this time. Let's take a look at it. Newsworthy events rarely happen in the small town where I was born. Okay. So, you have a dependent clause here. The dependent clause is where I was born. The main clause is newsworthy events rarely happen in the small town. Alright, so your subject, events, this is an adjective, this is an adverb, happen is your verb, and then you have a prepositional phrase, alright, prep under there, in the small town. Now the word being modified here is town, because which town? Where I was born. Which town are we talking about? The one I was born in. Okay, but where is an adverb? So you're going, wait, doesn't this make it adverbial? No, this is still an adjectival dependent clause because it is modifying a noun. So that's where you have to make sure you don't get confused. What does it modify? Tells you which kind of clause. It's still adjectival, town. All right, in your dependent clause, you again have a subject and a verb. I was born. Again, that's an adverb. So, we're going to diagram this. It's going to be a fairly large diagram. Let's take it on. All right. You're going to start with the main clause. Again, always start with the main clause. Events happen is your main clause. Remember, it's newsworthy events rarely happen. So events happen, what kind? Newsworthy. And they rarely happen. And then you had a prepositional phrase. In town, the small. In the small town. There's your main clause. Following in our textbook, you can look at it and see events happen is actually pattern 6. This is intransitive. Events happen. So, pattern 6 for the main clause. Now you have to add on the dependent clause. I was born. Remember, subject and verb of where I was born, I was born. The adverb, even though it technically comes first in the dependent clause, is still an adverb, so it has to be under the verb, regardless. That rule does not change, ever. So, adverb always below verb, even though that makes it on the board backwards to the way it was in the sentence. Now you have to connect town, which is a word being modified, to the beginning of the dependent clause, which is the word where. So you have to make, literally, a dotted line over to it. So you're just going to have to go out and then in again. So, even if you have to draw weird shapes around the diagrams, you have to indicate with the dotted line which two words are connected together. What is the sentence pattern of the dependent clause? Well, look at it. It says, I was born. That sentence can stand on its own. It's an intransitive verb here. So again, this is actually sentence pattern number 6 in our textbook. So, that is how you would take care of adverbial information used as an adjective. So, don't be afraid to draw weird things on the board, or on your paper, or on your tablet, for that matter. Alright, so let's stop here. This is kind of a lot of information, so I'm not just going to keep going on you. And consider how this adjectival information is connected in a sentence. Inevitably, 2 tiers.